This video is gonna go over the 5 most common mistakes people make when buying a country property. My name's Jared Ritz. I'm your YouTube lifestyle real estate expert out here in Southwest Washington. I can't wait to go on this adventure. Giddy up, let's go. Number 1, cost. People forget about the costs of road, rock, water, okay? I put $3,000 of rock on my road last year. It's about a 1.5 mile driveway. So if you had anything longer than that, 2 miles, 3 miles, you can put a lot of money into rock. Out here, North Clark County, bucket of rock's about $400 depending on what pit you take it from. But if you get a good 5/8 minus washed rock, you're probably $400 to $500 a load. And then you want to find a good delivery driver to be able to kind of grade it as they lay it. But rock's really expensive. Things like tractors. You know, my tractor setup is around $40,000. Mind you, it's a nice tractor, it's a good setup, but it's got implements like brush hogs and post hole diggers and snow plows. All of that comes at a cost. So I would say really think about budgeting for that. Other costs associated, internet. That gets pricey, especially with Starlink. You're $180 a month. You're gonna probably need that if you're in a rural community. Some other costs to think about, fuel, good old fashioned American petrol. It's not getting any cheaper, it's getting more and more expensive. The further out you live, the more fuel you're gonna be burning. So instead of driving for 8 minutes to get your kids to gymnastic, you're driving 48 minutes to get your kids to gymnastics. All of that costs money. Fuel for chainsaws, diesel fuel for tractors, fuel for generators. All of that has an expense. If you have a shop, think about how much more power you're gonna be using. Don't get me wrong, it's all worth it. This is what I sell, this is what I love to sell, this is what I live. So I do believe it's all worth it, but just make sure you're thinking about those ongoing costs. Are you on a well or are you on public water? If you're on a well, you're probably gonna have to replace a well pump at some point. You're probably gonna have to do water testing at some point. Just think of those costs. Let's talk about hobbies. You wanna know an expensive hobby? Hobby farming, especially when you compare it to pickleball, taekwondo, and bingo, like city folk like to do. Us country folk, we have expensive hobbies. And when you get into hobby farming, things like horses, goats, different types of animals, you need fences, you need T-posts, you need post hole diggers, you need ways to spread manure, you need ways to get rid of manure, you need to feed these creatures. These are all things to think about when looking at a country property. There's a lot of ongoing expenses, especially with country hobbies. The next mistake people make, work. The lazy days of drinking that coffee, sipping on that iced tea, they'll be there for the first week. And then in the second week, you got to get to work. Think about the amount of work you want to sign up for before going and actually looking at properties. Do you want something that's forested, that's going to be a little less maintenance, or do you want something wide open and usable? Usable means you need to manage it. You need to maintain it. You need to spray it. You need to clear it. You need to brush hog it. You need to make sure the fences are intact. There's work involved in that. Now, sometimes that's the dynamic people want when they do want to buy a country home or a farm or a hobby farm. They want to be out there with their family and friends maintaining it. That's half the fun. I mean, there's nothing better for me than going out and chopping a cord of wood with a couple cold ones on the back 40 with the boys. I love it. But that takes work and it takes planning and it takes budget. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about what type of land you're actually wanting to purchase. Another mistake people make is they don't think long-term enough. They're not thinking about their family plans. Do they plan to have children in the future? Do they already have kids? And have they asked their kids, do you guys actually want to live in the country? It could be 30 minutes to pickleball, 25 minutes to gymnastics, 15 minutes to the nearest swimming pool. Those are all conversations that you really need to have with the people who are going to be living with you. Conversely, we see a lot of multi-generational scenarios where mom and dad, or mom or dad, are living with you. They're living in an ADU. They're living in a guest house on the property. Have you thought about them traversing a hilly piece of ground, rough terrain, things like that? I would say really think about and have tough conversations with your loved ones who are going to be actually sharing this property with you to see if it's also what they want and how we can find that perfect property that works for everyone. Whether or not, here it comes. Weather is another huge mistake that people don't think about when moving to the country. Look where I am now. I'm at 2,000 feet. I'm looking all the way out to the coastal range. And if this was any cooler and there was precipitation, this area would have snow and everywhere under it would be green. We're on a microclimate here, and I'm sure you will be in a microclimate as well. So make sure that when you're Googling, hey, what's the weather in this part of Clark County? Be super descriptive, get the longitude and latitude, and look up historical weather patterns. It's super important. We've had ridges 5 minutes from my house that have had snow for 4 months out of the year, but we only had snow for 4 days out of that year. So I would say really look at microclimates and make sure that you can actually access your property year around. Some of these places are up mile-long driveways, that you need to be a mountain goat in the best of weather to traverse. Imagine that when there's sleet, snow, rain on the ground. Those are all really important things to think about, and don't make the same mistake others have by not really researching the weather. And here's another great tip. When you're at the open house, when you're seeing the property, I'm a huge advocate for knocking on the neighbor's door. If there's someone out and about, I'll usually pull them aside, introduce myself, introduce the buyers, and we ask them straight up, what's the weather like? How is the road? Do the neighbors all pitch into the road? Do the neighbors help plow the road? Do the neighbors help maintain the road? Do the neighbors help each other out when weather isn't great? And what is the weather? How many days without power do you traditionally have in a year here? What's the wind like? What's summers like? All of those things are really important to just ask a local or ask neighbors. And honestly, if there's not a neighbor out, go to the nearest neighborhood bar or convenience store and just ask the question, what's the weather like here in this month? And typically a local will be able to narrow it down for you. I think it's all about utilizing the community around you. You can't just Google weather out here. You really have to get boots on the ground, meet with locals, meet with neighbors to understand truly where you're buying and what the weather's going to be. Not all private roads in the county have road maintenance agreements. In fact, the one that I'm on today, there's almost 25 homes that access this property. They don't have a road maintenance agreement. It's a simple handshake. Everybody gets together for a beer at the 1st of July, and each person puts in what they think they should put in for the road maintenance, and it usually works out. However, there's always that cheap neighbor that never wants to pay up, and you really have to be aware of that. Usually the person at the end of the road furthest down who holds that dominant easement, they are going to be the one that's probably paying the most because you're having to travel more road to get to your property. So you just have to ask yourself, what's your comfort level? Are you comfortable not having a road maintenance agreement? Conversely, you can have road maintenance agreements, but they're not actually recorded with the county. And that's something that's really important. Make sure that if you're getting into a road maintenance agreement, it's been lawyered and it is recorded with the county. Road maintenance agreements kind of come in all shapes and sizes. Some include winter maintenance, some include grading, some include rock. I've also been in some situations where we've had road maintenance HOAs. All they did was the road maintenance. I've also had one where if you're part of the road maintenance agreement, by proxy, it gave you access to your property. That was a really unique scenario, but these things do come up. Make sure you know what you're buying, make sure you know what you're signing, and make sure that you and me and all of us, that we have actually read through the agreement and what it entails and budget for it. All right, guys, now that you know the most common mistakes when purchasing a country home, do you agree or disagree? Throw in the comments what your thoughts are. Also, if you guys want to know about listings that are coming up next year that are totally off market, send me an email. I would love to hear from you. Jared@unitedcountrynw.com, or just call or text me on my personal cell, 360-612-2079. I can't wait for the next adventure. Cheers.